The night shift on Aegis Watch was always quiet. Hanwoo sat at his station, watching the endless stream of data flow across his screens. Stars blinked in the distance like tiny diamonds scattered across black cloth. He had been doing this job for 3 years now, and most nights were the same. Empty space, background noise from distant pulsars, and the soft hum of the station's life support systems. Hanwoo yawned and reached for his coffee cup. The liquid inside had gone cold hours ago, but he drank it anyway. Around him, the other. Night crew members worked at their own stations. The communication center of Aegis Watch never truly slept. Someone always had to listen to the void just in case. That's when the signal hit. At first, Hanwoo thought his equipment was broken. The sound that came through his headphones was unlike anything he had heard before. It was structured, clearly, artificial, but using patterns that made no sense. The frequency was all wrong. The encoding was impossible. No human technology could send a signal like this. "Sora," Hanwoo called across the room to the linguistics station. "Can you come look?" At this, Sora pushed back from her desk and walked over. She was the station's expert on alien languages, though she rarely had much to do. Humans had met other species before, but those encounters usually ended badly. Most aliens seemed terrified of humans for reasons no one quite understood. "Xia, do you have?" Sora asked, putting on a spare set of headphones. Hanwoo played the signal again. Sora's eyes widened as she listened. She had studied alien communication patterns for years, but this was different. The signal was old, very old. The encoding methods were primitive compared to current galactic standards, yet somehow more sophisticated than anything humans had developed. "This is not from any known species," Sora said slowly. "And Hanwoo, look at the transmission path." Hanwoo checked his instruments. The signal had traveled through subspace, bouncing off relay points that shouldn't exist. The path showed it had come from a distance of 847 light-years. That was impossible. No signal could maintain coherence over such a vast distance. "Run it through the translation matrix," Sora said. "All of them. Every alien language we have on file." Hanwoo's fingers flew over his keyboard. The computer began processing the signal, comparing it to every known communication pattern. Minutes passed, then hours. The other night shift workers had gathered around, sensing something important was happening. Finally, the computer chimed. It had found a partial match. "Villani," Sora whispered, reading the results. "It's using ancient Villani linguistic patterns." The Villani were one of the few species that had made peaceful contact with humans decades ago. They were small, fox-like creatures from a garden world with low gravity. Their society was built around harmony and cooperation. They had shared some of their language with human scholars before contact was lost. "But this encoding is much older than the Villani we met," Sora continued. "This is like finding someone speaking ancient Latin." Hanwoo enhanced the signal and began the full translation process. As the computer worked, fragments of meaning began to emerge. What they saw made both of them go pale. It was a distress call. The message was broken, parts lost to the vast distance it had traveled. But the core meaning was clear. The Villani homeworld was under attack. Their people were dying. Their cities were burning. They were sending this message to anyone who might hear it, begging for help. But there was more. Buried in the signals. Data stream were star charts, tactical information, and something that made Hanwoo's blood run cold. The attackers were identified as the Korthak Empire. Even humans had heard of the Korthak. They were a militaristic species that had been conquering worlds for centuries. "So Ra," Hanwoo said quietly. "Look at the timestamp on this signal." So-Ra checked the data. The signal had been sent 6 months ago. For 6 months, it had been traveling through the void, searching for someone to hear it. The Vallani who sent it were probably dead by now. Their world was probably a burned shell. But why had the signal come here? Why had it found its way to human space? So-Ra found the answer buried deep in the message's code. The Vallani had programmed their distress call to seek out a specific type of recipient. They had searched their historical records and found references to humans. Stories told by traders and refugees. Tales of a species so violent and aggressive that they were called Deathworlders. The Vallani had been desperate enough to call for help from the monsters of galactic legend. "We need to tell Captain Jimin," So-Ra said. Captain Jimin was sleeping when they woke her. She listened to their report in silence, her face growing more serious with each detail. When they finished, she sat quietly for a long moment. "Play the message again," she said finally. They returned to the communication center. Jimin listened to the translated distress call 3 times. With each repetition, her expression grew sadder. She was a career military officer, trained to make hard decisions. But this decision would be the hardest of her career. Humanity had been in isolation for 50 years. After their first attempts at galactic contact had ended in panic and warfare, Earth had pulled back. Humans stayed in their own corner of space, and everyone else stayed away. It was safer that way. But Captain Jimin was looking at a message from a dying people who had nowhere else to turn. The Vallani had called out to the Deathworlders because no one else would help them. "Regulations say we report this to Earth Command and take no action," Jimin said slowly. But regulations were written by people who never heard a cry for help from across the galaxy. She stood up and walked to the main communication console. Her fingers hovered over the controls that would send a message back to Earth. Once she pressed those keys, there would be no taking it back. Humanity's isolation would be over. "Captain," Hanwoo said softly, "what are you doing?" "The right thing," Jimin replied. "I hope." She began typing her report to Admiral Tai Yang at Earth Defense Command. In simple, clear language, she explained what they had found. She included the full Vallani message, the tactical data about the Korthak Empire, and her recommendation. The Vallani needed help. Humanity had the power to provide it. The time for hiding was over. Jimin sent the message and then sat back in her chair. In a few hours, her transmission would reach Earth. Then the real decisions would begin. Outside the station's windows, the stars continued their eternal dance. But somewhere among them, 847 light-years away, people were dying. And for the first time in 50 years, they had managed to call for help from the legendary Deathworlders of Earth. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you made humanity angry. Admiral Tai Yang was drinking his morning tea when the message from Aegis Watch arrived. He had been expecting routine reports about shipping lanes and minor asteroid hazards. Instead, he found himself reading about an alien distress call that had traveled nearly 1,000 light-years to reach human space. He set down his cup and read the message again. Then, a third time. Each reading made the situation more real and more complicated. The Vallani were dying. That part was simple. The complicated part was what humanity should do about it. Tai Yang had lived through the contact wars, the period when humans first tried to join galactic civilization. Every attempt had ended badly. Other species looked at humans and saw monsters. They saw creatures from a death world who had evolved to be killers. Maybe they were right. Earth was a violent planet compared to most worlds in the galaxy. Humans had to fight just to survive childhood. They had weather that could kill, animals that hunted them, and natural disasters that wiped out entire cities. Most alien species came from stable, peaceful worlds where the biggest danger was running out of food. But that violent evolution had made humans into something unique. They were adaptable, aggressive, and completely insane by galactic standards. When faced with a problem, most species would form committees and debate solutions for years. Humans would just pick the most direct approach and charge ahead. Tae Yang walked to his office window and looked out at the shipyards orbiting Earth. Hundreds of vessels floated in the void, from tiny patrol boats to massive battleships. The TAD human fleet was small compared to the great galactic powers, but it was designed differently. Human ships were built to fight and survive in conditions that would destroy other vessels. He activated his communication system and called an emergency meeting of the Defense Council. Within an hour, the most important military leaders on Earth were gathered in the secure conference room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Tae Yang began, "we have received a distress call from the Villani homeworld. They are under attack by the Korthak Empire and requesting immediate assistance." The room erupted in discussion. Some council members argued for caution. Humanity had spent 50 years in isolation, and it had worked. Why risk war with a galactic power for aliens they barely knew? Others pointed out the moral implications. The Villani had reached out to humanity because no one else would help them. They were facing genocide, and Earth had the power to stop it. General Sung Ho, the commander of the First Fleet, spoke up. "Admiral, what are we actually talking about here? How many ships would we need to make a difference?" Tae Yang pulled up tactical displays showing the Korthak Empire. It was massive, spanning dozens of star systems. Their military was ancient and powerful, built on centuries of conquest. Intelligence estimates suggest the Korthak have committed at least 3 full battle fleets to the Villani campaign, Tae Yang said. That's roughly 300 vessels of various classes. "And we would send?" asked Captain Yu Jin, the head of humanitarian operations. "Everything we have," Tae Yang replied. "If we do this, we do it properly. No half measures." The debate continued for hours. Meanwhile, 847 light-years away, the situation was growing desperate. On the Villani homeworld of Serenus, Prime Harmony Kaylin watched her cities burn. The Korthak had been bombarding the planet for weeks. Their crystalline ships hung in orbit like deadly jewels, raining destruction on anything that moved. The Villani were not warriors. Their society had evolved around cooperation and peaceful solutions. They had defensive weapons, but nothing that could stand against the Korthak war machine. Their small fleet had been destroyed in the first hours of the invasion. Kaylin stood in the ruins of what had once been the capital city's central harmony garden. The beautiful crystal trees lay shattered. The singing fountains were silent. Her people huddled in underground shelters, waiting for the end. "Prime Harmony," her aide whispered. "The emergency broadcast is ready." Kaylin nodded. They had been sending distress calls for months, but no one had answered. The great galactic powers were too afraid of the Korthak to intervene. Smaller species lacked the strength to help. Only the mythical Deathworlders of Earth remained. Most Villani believed humans were just stories, tales told by traders about impossible. creatures from a world of eternal war. But Kaylin had studied the historical records. Humans were real. They were violent and unpredictable, but they had shown mercy to refugees in the past. It was their only hope. "Broadcast on all frequencies," Kaylin ordered. "If the Deathworlders exist, maybe they will hear us." High above Serenus, Korthak Supreme, Commander Vex received reports of the alien broadcast. The Villani were still sending their pathetic calls for help. It was amusing in a way. They actually believed someone would come to save them. Vex was a crystalline being, evolved from silicon-based, life on a high-pressure world. The Korthak had been conquering the galaxy for 1,000 years. They were efficient, ruthless, and completely unstoppable. No species had ever successfully resisted them for long. The idea that these weak plant eaters could summon help was laughable, especially help from the legendary Deathworlders. Vex had heard the stories, of course. Every military commander in the galaxy knew the tales of Earth's children. But stories were all they were. The death world called Earth supposedly produced creatures so violent that they fought each other for entertainment. They lived on a planet where the weather could kill and the animals hunted in packs. They had evolved to find warfare exciting rather than terrifying. It was clearly impossible. No species could survive such conditions, let alone thrive. The stories were propaganda designed to frighten enemies. Even if humans existed, they were probably just another weak species hiding behind scary stories. Vex ordered the bombardment to continue. In a few more days, Serenus would be a dead world, and the Korthak Empire would claim another victory. Back on Earth, the Defense Council had reached a decision. It had taken 12 hours of argument, but Admiral Tae Yang had finally convinced them. The vote was close, but it was enough. Humanity would answer the call. "Operation Shepherd is authorized," Tae Yang announced. "General Sung Ho, prepare the first assault fleet for immediate departure. Captain Yu Jin, ready all medical and evacuation vessels. Commander Min Seo, I want your special operations teams ready for deep insertion." The room buzzed with activity as orders went out. Within hours, human shipyards were working at maximum capacity. Ships that had been in routine maintenance were rushed back into service. Crews that had been on leave were recalled to duty. The largest human military operation in 50 years was beginning. As the fleets prepared to depart, Admiral Tae Yang stood once again at his window. He watched the ships gathering in formation, their hulls gleaming in the light of Earth's sun. Soon they would jump to hyperspace and begin the long journey to Villani space. The galaxy thought humans were monsters. Maybe they were right. But sometimes, the galaxy needed monsters. Sometimes someone had to be willing to fight back against the darkness. The age of human isolation was ending. What came next would either save the Villani or start the greatest war in galactic history. Tai Yang hoped. They were making the right choice. But even if they weren't, it was too late to turn back now. The Korthak system defense grid was supposed to be impossible to break. For 300 years, it had protected the core worlds of the Korthak Empire. The massive stations were armed with weapons that could destroy entire fleets. Their shields could absorb the energy of a small star. Their sensors could detect approaching enemies from light years away. Commander Min Seo studied the tactical display on her flagship, Soul's Fury. The defense grid looked exactly like the intelligence reports had described. 12 orbital platforms arranged in a perfect sphere around the Korthak fleet yards. Each platform was the size of a small moon and bristling with weapons. "Ma'am," her tactical officer said, "the grid is detecting our approach. They're powering up weapons." Mincio smiled. Good. Let them think they see us coming. What the Korthak sensors were detecting was a carefully planned deception. The human ships had split into 3 groups before entering the system. The main fleet was approaching openly, making as much noise as possible. They wanted the Korthak to focus on that obvious threat. Meanwhile, Minceo's deep strike force had taken a much more dangerous route. They had jumped directly into hyperspace above. The system's gravity well, something that most species considered suicide. Human navigation computers were built differently, designed to handle the chaotic gravitational fields around Earth. What seemed impossible to aliens was just another Tuesday for human pilots. Emergence in 30 seconds, the navigator announced. All ships report ready. Mincio looked around the bridge of Soul's Fury. Her crew was calm and focused. They had trained for this kind of operation their entire careers. Emerging from hyperspace inside an enemy defense grid was exactly the sort of insane tactic that humans specialized in. Emergence in 10 seconds, the navigator counted down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, emergence complete. Reality shifted around. Them as Soul's Fury and her escort destroyers dropped back into normal space. They were inside the Korthak defense grid, surrounded by the massive orbital platforms. Alarms immediately began blaring on every Korthak station. Weapons free, Mincio ordered. Target the command platforms first. The human ships opened fire with everything they had. Railguns launched projectiles at 15% of light speed. Plasma cannons fired streams of contained stellar fire. Missile tubes released swarms of intelligent warheads that could think for themselves. The Korthak had never seen weapons like these. Most galactic powers used energy-efficient, precise weaponry designed for long sieges. Humans had evolved on a world where everything tried to kill them, so they built weapons designed to kill everything as quickly as possible. The first Korthak platform died in seconds. Its crystalline hull, designed to deflect energy weapons, shattered under the kinetic impact of human railgun rounds. The second platform's shields overloaded when hit by concentrated plasma fire hot enough to melt starship armor. "This is impossible," Supreme Commander Vex said from his command ship. "How are they inside our defenses?" His tactical officer was staring at the displays in shock. "Sir, they emerged from hyperspace directly into the grid. That should have killed them." "Should have," Vex repeated. He was beginning to understand that humans didn't follow the normal rules of warfare. They did things that other species considered impossible, and somehow made them work. The main human fleet arrived 15 minutes later. Admiral Sung Ho's assault ships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system and immediately began their attack run. The Korthak fleet moved to intercept, confident that their superior numbers would tell. They were wrong. Human tactical doctrine was built around speed and overwhelming firepower. While Korthak ships tried to form neat battle lines, human vessels darted between them like angry hornets. They used the system's asteroid field for cover, popping out to fire devastating volleys before disappearing again. The Korthak had been fighting the same way for centuries. They would form up their fleets, close to effective range, and trade shots until one side was destroyed. It was honorable, predictable, and completely useless against humans who refused to stand still and fight fair. "Sir," a Korthak officer reported, "we've lost 6 cruisers and the humans haven't taken any significant damage." Supreme Commander Vex watched another of his ships explode on the tactical display. The human vessels were using weapons that ignored shields and armor, treating his proud battle fleet like target practice. But the real shock came when the human rescue fleet arrived. Captain Yu Jin's medical frigates dropped out of hyperspace, right into the middle of the battle. Any sane species would have waited for the combat zone to be secured. Instead, the human rescue ships began broadcasting on all frequencies, calling for Villani survivors. "This is the Earthship Mercy's Hand," Eugen announced. "Any Villani vessels or survivors, please respond. We are here to help." The first response came from a damaged Villani transport hiding behind a shattered moon. It had been there for weeks, its crew too frightened to move. The sight of human warships tearing apart the Korthak fleet gave them hope for the first time since the invasion began. "Human ship, this is Villani transport Gentle Current. We have 300 survivors aboard, including many wounded. Acknowledged, Gentle Current. Maintain your position. Medical teams are on the way." What happened next became legend throughout the galaxy. Human rescue shuttles launched from Eugen's ships and flew directly through the combat zone. They dodged between battling fleets, weaved through debris fields, and somehow managed to reach the Villani survivors. To humans, this was standard procedure. Earth's emergency services routinely operated in hurricanes, earthquakes, and volcanic eruptions. A space battle was just another natural disaster to work around. To the watching galaxy, it was proof that humans were either completely insane or possessed of courage beyond understanding. The Battle of the Korthak defense grid lasted 2 hours and 17 minutes. When it ended, the supposedly impregnable fortress was a field of drifting wreckage. 12 orbital platforms had been reduced to scrap metal. The Korthak fleet had been scattered or destroyed. Human casualties were minimal. 3 destroyers had taken damage, and Sol's Fury had lost her forward sensor array. The rescue fleet had suffered no losses at all, despite operating in an active war zone. Supreme Commander Vex found himself aboard a damaged command ship, watching the human fleet regroup around the ruins of his defenses. His communications officer was receiving surrender offers from Korthak garrison commanders throughout the system. The Empire's most important military stronghold had fallen in less than 3 hours. "Sir," the officer said quietly, "Admiral Sung Ho is requesting your surrender." Vex looked at the tactical display. The human ships had formed a protective screen around their rescue vessels, which were busy collecting Villani survivors from throughout the system. They weren't looting or destroying. They were saving lives. For the first time in his career, Supreme Commander Vex began to understand why the galaxy feared the Deathworlders. It wasn't just their weapons or their tactics. It was their complete disregard for what was supposed to be possible. They had crossed nearly 1,000 light-years to save a species they barely knew. They had destroyed a fortress that had stood for 3 centuries. They had done it all in a few hours, and they had done it while simultaneously rescuing civilians. The legends were true. Humans were monsters, but they were monsters who chose to protect the innocent rather than prey on the weak. The age of Korthak dominance in this region of space was over. The age of human intervention had begun. News traveled fast in the galaxy, but some news traveled faster than others. Within days of the Battle of the Korthak defense grid, every major power in known space had received reports. The impossible had happened. The legendary Deathworlders had emerged from their isolation, and they had done exactly what the legends claimed they could do. In the crystal spires of the hegemony's capital world, emergency sessions ran day and night. The hegemony had maintained galactic peace for centuries through careful diplomacy and economic pressure. The sudden appearance of a military force capable of casual system cracking changed every calculation they had made. The trade syndicate's merchant princes were equally disturbed. Their power came from controlling the flow of goods between star systems. But what happened to trade routes when one species could cross the galaxy in weeks and destroy any opposition they encountered? The psionic collective, beings of pure mental energy who rarely concerned themselves with physical warfare, found themselves facing an uncomfortable truth. The humans had destroyed the Korthak not through superior technology or psychic power, but through simple, brutal effectiveness. It was a reminder that sometimes the most basic solutions were the most devastating. On the Villani homeworld of Serenus, Captain Eugene stood in what had once been the planet's capital city. The beautiful crystal gardens were gone, replaced by rubble and ash. The singing fountains that had been the pride of Villani civilization lay in pieces. The bombardment had lasted weeks, and the scars would take generations to heal. But the planet was alive. That was what mattered. "Captain," her medical officer reported, "we've evacuated 847 million Villani from the surface. The fleet is at maximum capacity." Eugene nodded. The human rescue operation had been running for 3 days without stopping. Every available transport had been pressed into service. Cargo holds had been converted into temporary shelters. Even warships were carrying refugees in their maintenance bays. To most galactic species, evacuating nearly 1 billion people would have been impossible. The logistics alone would have taken years to organize. But humans had experience with planetary disasters. They had moved entire populations ahead of asteroid impacts, volcanic supereruptions, and climate collapse events. Moving the Villani was just a very large version of operations they had run hundreds of times before. "What's our destination?" the medical officer asked. "New Harmony," Eugene replied. "It's a garden world in human space, similar to Serenus. The Colonial Council has agreed to accept the Villani as permanent residents. Dr. Haisun was working in a field hospital when she made the discovery that would change everything. She had been treating Villani survivors for 3 days, documenting their injuries and the effects of Korthak weapons. Most of the wounds were typical of energy bombardment and kinetic impacts, but some of the survivors showed signs of something else. "Captain Eugene," Hyasun called across the medical bay. "I need you to see this." Eugene walked over to where Hyasun was examining a young Villani male. The fox-like alien was unconscious, but his vital signs were stable. What caught Eugene's attention were the strange marks on his fur. They looked like burn patterns, but they were too precise to be accidental. "The Korthak weren't just bombarding cities," Hyasun explained. "They were conducting biological harvests. This individual and several others show signs of neural extraction procedures." Eugene felt her blood run cold. "Neural extraction?" "They were removing brain tissue," Hyasun said quietly. "Specifically, tissue from the areas that control psychic abilities. The Villani are naturally telepathic, though only weakly. The Korthak were harvesting that ability. The implications were staggering." Eugene immediately contacted Admiral Sung Ho, who was coordinating the fleet operations from his flagship. Within an hour, Dr. Hyasun was presenting her findings to the senior command staff. "The evidence is conclusive," Hyasun said, displaying medical scans on the conference room's main screen. "The Korthak have been systematically harvesting psychic tissue from conquered species. Based on the surgical precision, they've been doing this for decades, possibly centuries." Admiral Sung Ho studied the data. "What would they use it for?" "Enhancement of their own forces," Hyasun replied. "Psychic abilities can be artificially implanted, though the process is usually fatal. The Korthak seem to have perfected the technique." Commander Min Seo, recently promoted to Admiral after her successful deep strike, leaned forward. "So we're not just dealing with a normal military expansion. This is a galaxy-wide harvesting operation. Exactly, Hyasun confirmed. Every species the Korthak have conquered, every world they've stripped bare, it was all to create an army of psychically enhanced super soldiers. The medical data was transmitted back to Earth immediately. Admiral Tai Yang received the report while he was reviewing intelligence reports from across human space. What he read made him realize that the rescue of the Vallani was just the beginning. Long-range sensors were detecting massive fleet movements throughout Korthak space. Ships that had been scattered across dozens of conquered worlds were converging on staging areas. The humans hadn't just disrupted a local conquest. They had interrupted a carefully planned operation that had been decades in the making. The Korthak Empire was mobilizing for total war. "How many ships are we talking about?" Taiyang asked his intelligence chief. "Conservative estimates suggest 10,000 vessels, sir. Possibly more. They're pulling ships from garrison duties across their entire territory." Tai Yang looked at the tactical displays showing human fleet positions. Operation Shepherd had committed 200 ships to the Vallani rescue. It was the largest human fleet ever assembled, and it was still outnumbered 50-1. In the ruins of his command center on Korthak Prime, Supreme Commander Vex was coordinating the largest military mobilization in his empire's history. The loss of the defense grid had been humiliating, but it had also been educational. The humans fought like nothing the Korthak had ever encountered. They would not make the same mistake twice. "Status report," Vex demanded. "All fleet elements are responding," his aide reported. "The harvest operations have been suspended. Every available ship is being recalled for the counterattack." Vex studied the holographic display showing the positions of his forces. 10,000 ships was the largest fleet the galaxy had seen in recorded history. It should be enough to crush the human expeditionary force and then carry the war to Earth itself. But Vex had learned to be cautious where humans were concerned. They had already proven that normal tactical assumptions didn't apply to them. Their small fleet had accomplished what should have been impossible with 10 times the numbers. "What are our intelligence reports on human military capabilities?" Vex asked. "Limited, sir. They've been in isolation for 50 years. We know they have approximately 300 ships total, and 200 of them are currently in our territory. Their technology appears to be specifically designed for close-range combat." Vex nodded. The humans preferred to get close and fight with brutal efficiency rather than engage in long-range bombardment. It was a risky strategy that could be countered with superior numbers and careful positioning. "Issue the order," Vex said. "All fleets are to converge on the Vallani system. We will crush the human expeditionary force and end this threat before it can spread." Back on the human flagship, Admiral Sung Ho received reports of the Korthak fleet movements. The enemy was gathering everything they had for one massive battle. It was exactly what he had hoped they would do. "Admiral Minseo," Sung Ho said over the communication channel. "I have a mission for your special operations teams. Ready to receive orders, sir." "The Korthak are pulling ships from garrison duties across their territory. That means their conquered worlds are defenseless. I want you to visit those worlds and make some new friends." Minseo smiled. She understood immediately. While the Korthak focused their entire military on destroying the human fleet, human special forces would be liberating the species they had conquered. The empire that had built its power on fear and oppression was about to learn what happened when the oppressed were given hope. The Battle of Serenus had been just the beginning. The real war was about to start. Korthak Prime had never been threatened before. For 1,000 years, the fortress world had been the beating heart of the Empire, protected by fleets that could shatter planets and defenses that could withstand the fury of stars. Now, as Supreme Commander Vex stood in his command center watching the tactical displays, he saw something that should have been impossible. The entire human fleet was approaching his home world. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "long range. Sensors confirm 200 human vessels on direct approach. They'll reach the outer defense perimeter in 6 hours." Vex studied the numbers. 10,000 Korthak ships versus 200 human vessels. By any rational calculation, the humans should be annihilated within minutes. But Vex had learned not to trust rational calculations when dealing with Deathworlders. "Status of our defenses?" he asked. "All orbital platforms are at full readiness. The home fleet is in perfect formation. Ground-based weapons are powered and targeted, sir. Even if these humans fight like demons, they cannot possibly break through." Vex hoped his officer was right. But deep in his crystalline heart, he knew the humans wouldn't have come here unless they had a plan. They didn't seem capable of making plans that made sense to anyone else, but their plans had a disturbing tendency to work. Admiral Sung Ho stood on the bridge of his flagship, Earth's Pride, watching Korthak Prime grow larger on the main screen. The planet was a fortress, surrounded by more weapons than some species possessed in their entire military. It should have been suicide to attack such a place with only 200 ships. That was exactly why it would work. "Admiral Minseo report," Sung Ho said into his communication headset. "Deep strike operations proceeding as planned," came the reply from somewhere in Korthak space. 17 systems liberated so far. Local populations are responding better than expected. Sung Ho smiled. While the Korthak had been gathering their forces for this massive battle, Admiral Minseo had been busy visiting their conquered worlds. She was offering immediate evacuation to any species that wanted to leave and tactical support to any species that wanted to fight. The response had been overwhelming. Billions of enslaved beings across hundreds of worlds were rising in coordinated rebellion. Species that the galaxy had written off as extinct were revealing that they had been secretly preparing for this moment for generations. "Captain Yu Jin, status of rescue operations." "All medical ships standing by," Yu Jin reported. "We're ready to evacuate civilians from any world that requests assistance." "Excellent. Begin Phase 2. What happened next caught the Korthak completely off guard. Instead of attacking Korthak Prime directly, the human fleet split into dozens of smaller groups. Each group jumped to hyperspace, heading for different systems throughout the Empire. "Where are they going?" Vex demanded. "Sir, they're spreading out across our entire territory. Small groups are hitting supply depots, communication nodes, and garrison posts. They're not trying to conquer territory. They're trying to cause maximum chaos." Vex realized with growing horror what the humans were doing. They weren't fighting a conventional battle. They were conducting a liberation campaign. While his massive fleet sat protecting the homeworld, human forces were systematically freeing every enslaved species in the Empire. "Order all fleets to disperse," Vex commanded. "Protect our critical infrastructure." "Sir, that will leave Korthak Prime defended by only the home fleet and orbital platforms." "Do it," Vex ordered. "If we lose our conquered territories, the Empire falls anyway." But it was already too late. The human strategy had been planned months in advance. As soon as Korthak fleets began moving to protect their territory, Admiral Sung Ho made his move. 50 human ships emerged from hyperspace directly above Korthak Prime. They had used the same insane emergence tactic that had worked at the defense grid, appearing inside the planet's orbital defenses. But this time, they weren't carrying conventional weapons. "Admiral," his weapons officer reported, "we're in position." "Deploy the packages," Sung Ho ordered. The human ships released thousands of small objects that looked like harmless metal spheres. The Korthak defense systems ignored them, focusing on the ships that had delivered them. It was a fatal mistake. The spheres were hyperspace mines, a uniquely human invention. They could phase in and out of normal space, allowing them to bypass shields and armor completely. When they detonated, they did so inside enemy vessels. The orbital defense platforms died first. Explosions bloomed throughout their superstructures as the mines activated inside critical systems. Weapons that could destroy fleets were reduced to drifting scrap in seconds. The Korthak home fleet tried to respond, but they faced the same problem. Human ships darted between them, deploying more mines while broadcasting on all frequencies. "Attention all enslaved populations," Captain Yujin's voice echoed across Korthak space. "This is the human rescue fleet. Immediate evacuation is available for any species wishing to leave. Transport ships are standing by." The response was immediate and overwhelming. On 1,000 different worlds, alien populations that had been enslaved for generations began signaling their desire for freedom. Human rescue ships appeared as if from nowhere, offering passage to safe worlds in human space. On Korthak Prime itself, the ruling caste watched in disbelief as their empire crumbled around them. Supreme Commander Vex stood in his command center, surrounded by reports of rebellion and liberation. Systems that had been under Korthak control for centuries were declaring independence. Entire fleets were surrendering rather than fight the human forces. "Sir," his communication officer said quietly, "we're receiving surrender offers from garrison commanders throughout the Empire." Vex looked at the tactical display. The great Korthak Empire, built over 1,000 years of conquest, was falling apart in less than 3 days. The humans hadn't conquered it through superior firepower. They had simply offered the enslaved populations a choice: freedom or continued oppression. Most had chosen freedom. "Admiral Sung Ho is requesting your personal surrender," the officer continued. Vex considered his options. He could fight to the end, destroying his homeworld in a final act of defiance, or he could accept that the age of Korthak dominance was over. He made his choice. "Open a channel to the human fleet," Vex said. On the bridge of Earth's Pride, Admiral Sung Ho received the surrender of the Korthak Empire. It had taken 72 hours to accomplish what military experts had said would require decades of warfare. The humans had done it not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through simple strategic thinking. They had offered hope to the hopeless and freedom to the enslaved, in a galaxy where most conflicts were fought over territory or resources. The humans had fought for principles. But victory came with a price that changed everything. As the last Korthak forces surrendered, their final weapon activated. It was not a bomb or a fleet of ships. It was a psychic scream that reached across the galaxy, carrying a simple message. "If the Deathworlders can do this to us, what will they do to you?" The message reached every major power in known space. Species that had never heard of humans suddenly knew that the legendary Deathworlders were real, and they were capable of destroying galactic empires in a matter of days. Fear spread faster than the news of victory. Admiral Tae Yang received the first reports while standing on the observation deck of Earth Defense Command. The liberation of Korthak space was complete, but the galaxy was already reacting. 3 major powers had placed their fleets on high alert. Dozens of smaller species were requesting immediate defensive alliances. "Sir," his aide reported, We're receiving distress calls from 847 different species. They're all requesting protection from various threats. Tai Yang looked out at the stars, knowing that humanity stood at a crossroads. They could retreat back to their isolated corner of space and let the galaxy sort itself out. Or they could step forward and accept the responsibility that came with their power. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Once you heard a cry for help, you couldn't unhear it. "Prepare the fleets," Tai Yang ordered. "It looks like we're going to be busy." The age of human isolation was over. The age of human responsibility had begun. Across the galaxy, the weak and oppressed looked to the stars and whispered the same prayer. "Send us the Deathworlders." And for the first time in galactic history, someone was listening.